The golf cart was chained to my EV charger with fairy lights, a paper lantern, and a handwritten sign that read, "Reserved for real vehicles, HOA approved." There was soft jazz playing from its Bluetooth speaker, a cheese platter on the hood, and Karen, yes, that Karen, was clinking wine glasses with 3 other HOA members like she'd just conquered the Roman Empire. I stood there barefoot in my driveway at 11 p.m., holding a dead Tesla charging cable in one hand and my last shred of patience in the other. That was the moment I realized something profoundly unhinged had happened in this neighborhood, and I was about to flip the script entirely. It hadn't always been this way. When I moved into the HOA-governed community of Cactus Grove Estates, all I wanted was peace, solar energy, and quiet evenings working from home. I just left my high-stress consulting job in the city and was transitioning into remote tech gig. Bought a beautiful 1-story desert home with a wide driveway and an HOA-approved EV charger, complete with solar-fed power, a discreet wall mount, and a quiet hum that only I appreciated. For a few glorious weeks it was perfect. Then Karen arrived, or rather, she emerged, like a pufferfish from a cactus. She introduced herself the day I moved in the same tone you might use to announce a disease outbreak. "Hi, I'm Karen, head of the HOA. We try to keep things traditional here." She looked at my Tesla like it was a stray raccoon and then at my solar panels like they were alien transmitters. I thought she was just being her usual HOA self, fussy, overly concerned, a little bored. But it quickly became clear she had taken my very existence as some kind of personal insult. It started small. Her golf cart would mysteriously slip closer and closer to my charger every morning. I'd leave for groceries, come back, and find her dusty beige cart sitting an inch away from the plug. She claimed the charger was on shared property, despite the installation being permitted, approved, and mostly paid for out of pocket. I showed her the receipts. She handed me a brochure on neighborhood harmony and warned me against uncooperative behavior. Then came the newsletter. She wrote it herself, clearly. There was a whole section titled, "The Silent Takeover of Electric Obsession," complete with a blurry stock photo of a Tesla and bullet points about electromagnetic fields, property value risks, and what she called energy entitlement. My name wasn't mentioned, but the message couldn't be louder if it were carved into my driveway. I laughed. My neighbors did not. By week 4, it escalated. I returned home from a weekend hike to find her cart parked directly over the charger cable, tire marks across the plug. I knocked on her door, politely, and she answered with sunglasses, a spray tan, and a smug smile. "Oh, did it get in the way? Maybe if your car wasn't so big and needy." Needy? My car wasn't a toddler. But it did need power, and her cart was now a blockade. I filed a formal complaint with the HOA. The response was swift and surreal. After review, it has been determined that parking near the charger is not prohibited. Please pursue personal resolutions. Basically, Karen was the HOA, and the HOA had spoken. I installed a ring cam facing the charger. Within 24 hours, I caught Karen plugging in a tangled string of Christmas lights and a mini heater into the outlet box. She was draining power like it was a public utility. I confronted her again. She claimed she was just checking if the system worked for everyone. When I pointed out that it was a private installation, she scoffed and said, "That's what people say when they want to hoard resources." I emailed the board. Silence. I called the management company. They said all inquiries had to go through Karen. I considered calling the city, but she'd already covered her tracks. The permit was vague, the charger slightly on the property line, and she had plenty of plausible deniability. Every time I took a step forward, she slid in sideways like a bureaucratic eel. Then came the power surge. One night, as I was recharging my car and watching TV, the lights flickered. My router reset. My EV app glitched. I went outside and found my breaker trip. When I opened the box, it reeked of burnt plastic. The extension cord Karen had shoved into the panel had overloaded the system. I reviewed the camera footage. There she was, wearing rubber gardening gloves, plugging in her margarita blender, and what looked like a space heater. I sent the footage to the HOA email list with the subject line, "This is what's draining your fees." No response. The next morning, there was a notice taped to my front door. "Cease and desist use of private surveillance on community members. Your camera violates Article 4B of the HOA bylaws." Alongside it, a $500 fine for unauthorized power draw. My hands were shaking. Not from rage, but from the sheer absurdity of it all. Karen had hijacked my charger, weaponized the HOA, fried my power grid, and now had the audacity to fine me for protecting my own property. I sat on the curb, staring at the golf cart parked across my driveway like it was a mafia enforcer. And that's when I heard it, the gentle hum of jazz. I looked up. Karen had turned her cart into a party lounge. Fairy lights draped over the roof. A fold-out tray with cheese cubes and rows. 3 other board members giggling in folding chairs. And the kicker? A handwritten sign, "Reserved, real residents only." I couldn't believe it. She'd turned my charger into her social hour. That was the moment something clicked inside me. I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to outmaneuver her. If she wanted to play games, she'd picked the wrong player. I didn't spend a decade engineering networks and penetration tests to be outwitted by a woman who thought Facebook was a research journal. As Karen raised her wine glass and toasted to the power of community, I took one last look at that smug little cart and smiled. Because I'd already started designing its transformation, and she had no idea it was about to become the most famous vehicle in Cactus Grove. By the next morning, the wine glasses were gone, but Karen's cart was still parked in its prime position, nose first against my EV charger, the cable bent awkwardly underneath one of its tires. The fairy lights had slid off and were now dangling into my rosemary bush like drunken party streamers. My neighbor Frank walked by, gave me a sympathetic shrug, and mumbled, "She did the same thing to the guy with the flagpole last year." He moved. But I wasn't going anywhere. I wasn't wired that way. And this wasn't just about a charger anymore. This was about principle. I woke up to find a crisp envelope stuck to my door. Another notice from the HOA, this time citing me for unapproved electrical infrastructure and unneighborly surveillance equipment. Apparently, my security camera, mounted and approved with permits, was now being reinterpreted as a privacy intrusion. And just to spice things up, they included a $500 fine, payable within 10 days, or further action would be taken. I stared at the letter and let out a long, dry laugh. I wasn't sure if it was from disbelief or if I had simply crossed into the part of the HOA nightmare where laughter became my only form of therapy. I marched straight to the HOA office. It was a beige stucco building with artificial succulents and a stack of outdated community newsletters in the lobby. Karen sat behind the reception desk, like a gatekeeper to some HOA version of purgatory. Her lips curled when she saw me. "Oh, Sam," she said with that patronizing purr. "I assume you got our little note. We had some complaints about the charger again." I kept my voice calm. "The only complaint is from you. And you're violating your own parking rules by blocking access to a private installation." She tapped on her keyboard like she was ordering shoes online. "The board decided that since your charger is visible from the public sidewalk, it qualifies as a shared amenity. Therefore, anyone in the neighborhood can reasonably access it." I blinked. "So, because people can see it, it doesn't belong to me anymore?" She smiled like she'd just handed down a ruling from the Supreme Court. "Precisely." I turned to the bulletin board behind her. Photos of summer barbecues, Halloween costume contests, and Karen front and center in every single one. I noticed something else too. The list of active board members had only 2 names on it, Karen as president and her friend Dolores as treasurer. No secretary. No vice president. No community representatives. The rest were listed as temporarily inactive. That was a red flag the size of Texas. Back home, I did a little digging. Turns out, HOA bylaws allow the president to suspend members for disruptive conduct, pending a hearing, something Karen had apparently done to the entire board over the past 2 months. I reached out to one of them, a retired teacher named Miss Clara. She answered on the first ring and immediately said, "Let me guess, Karen's after you now?" We talked for over an hour. She'd been voted in as secretary but was temporarily suspended after she questioned a budget item labeled cart fuel reimbursement. According to her, Karen had slowly squeezed out anyone who challenged her, turning the board into her personal echo chamber. Clara was frustrated but also scared. She files complaints about anyone who questions her, then fines them until they either pay or sell. It wasn't just me. Karen had weaponized the HOA. And her golf cart wasn't just a passive-aggressive eyesore, it was her mobile throne. That explained the smug little cart court I found outside my driveway the following day. 3 golf carts lined up, one of them clearly borrowed from the HOA rec center. They were positioned to create a blockade, boxed in tightly enough that even if my EV cable reached, there was no physical space to charge. I asked one of the cart owners what was going on, and she said Karen had reserved the area for community cart socialization. Whatever that meant. I tried backing my car in at a diagonal to reach the charger, but Karen showed up with a tape measure and claimed I was obstructing the walkway. She handed me another citation slip and called it a courtesy warning. I asked her what ordinance I'd violated. She smiled and said, "The common sense one." It was infuriating. Every time I tried to use something I owned, Karen found a new way to block, bend, or bury me in red tape. I contacted the city inspector to double-check my installation. He confirmed it was legal, compliant, and privately funded. But he also said the HOA could still enforce cosmetic ordinances and shared access interpretations unless challenged legally. That's when I realized something else. The fight wasn't just about my charger. It was about Karen establishing dominance over anything new, different, or outside her antique playbook. She was afraid of change, and my EV represented everything she couldn't control. She wanted to paint this neighborhood like a Rockwell portrait frozen in 1983, and I was the electric blue glitch in her sepia-toned fantasy. One evening, I walked out to unplug my car and found the charger housing open. Someone had unscrewed the faceplate and left the grounding cable dangling. I checked the security footage. The camera had been sprayed with something, probably bug spray or hairspray, clouding the lens just enough to obscure the culprit. But I didn't need a detective. I already knew. I emailed the footage, the inspection report, the HOA complaint logs, and a detailed incident timeline to the property management company. I CC'd Karen. Her reply was instantaneous. She accused me of harassment and obsessive documentation. She attached a grainy photo of my camera and called it a threat to neighborly privacy. And then she hit me with the kicker. A threat to suspend my community privileges, including access to the pool, clubhouse, and, yes, my own driveway charger. I sat there for a few minutes, just staring at the screen. This wasn't a feud anymore. This was a siege. But I had one thing Karen didn't. I had patience, and I had the kind of mind that didn't just solve problems, it reverse-engineered them. So I did what any rational, annoyed, tech-savvy adult would do. I started researching golf carts, and community development loopholes, and a curious little phrase buried deep in the HOA bylaws. Permanent installations related to community literacy, safety, or education shall be afforded protection from punitive review. Karen was obsessed with her cart. Fine. I would make her cart the most educational object in the neighborhood. I would turn it into a symbol of everything she couldn't control. And when I was done, her smug little cheese mobiles would never block another charger again. As I began sketching out plans for its transformation, I smiled for the first time in days. Because the next move wasn't hers. It was mine. I spent the next 2 days in what I can only describe as the most diabolically wholesome brainstorming session of my life. The idea was simple in concept, but beautiful in execution. If Karen wanted to park her golf cart in front of my charger and treat it like her personal kingdom, then I was going to transform that kingdom into a castle made of books. Literally. According to the HOA bylaws, which I had now practically memorized, any permanent community installation promoting literacy or education was exempt from enforcement actions or citations, provided it was publicly accessible and caused no obstruction to emergency access routes. Karen had unknowingly created the perfect staging ground for her own undoing, and I was going to make her cart the flagship vehicle of the HOA's first mobile community library. Of course, I couldn't do it alone. I needed allies. And the beautiful part was, Karen had already created a community full of them through years of relentless micromanagement. First, I reached out to Clara, the suspended board secretary who'd been sidelined for questioning Karen's expenses. She didn't hesitate for even a second. Then I knocked on the door of George, a Vietnam vet who'd been fined $200 for having a flagpole 2 inches taller than regulation. He stared at me for a long moment when I told him the plan, then said, "You want to turn her cart into a library?" I nodded. He burst out laughing and said, "You magnificent lunatic. I'm in." Before long, we had a crew. A graphic designer named Tasha, who'd been fined for sidewalk chalk. A retired engineer named Milton, who still held a grudge after being cited for using LED light bulbs that were too blue. And a teenager named Mateo, who just wanted to get back at Karen for shutting down his lemonade stand 3 summers in a row. We dubbed ourselves the Cartastrophe Avengers and started communicating through a group chat we named Book the Cart. Step 1 was simple: retrieve the cart. That part turned out to be easier than expected because Karen left it unlocked nearly every night, assuming its sacred position in front of my charger was safe and untouchable. It had become her nightly monument to power. That night, Clara stood watch while Milton quietly rolled the cart down the street into his garage. No alarms. No motion lights. Just one smug little cart rolling into destiny. Over the next 48 hours it transformed. We sanded it down, repainted the exterior in a soft sky blue, and added wooden shelving on both sides. Tasha designed a magnetic decal for the side that read Cactus Grove Community Library, powered by the people. George wired in a small solar-powered LED reading light on the roof. We added a plexiglass container with a rotating selection of donated books, children's stories, crossword puzzle booklets, and even a few local history pamphlets. Mateo added a chalkboard sign to the front that read, "Take a book, leave a book, or just read and relax." Inside, we left a miniature cooler stocked with juice boxes, bookmarks printed with quotes from famous authors, and a hidden camera, just in case. The piece de resistance? A brass plate on the dashboard that read, "Donated in honor of HOA President Karen T. for her relentless pursuit of community engagement." At exactly 6 a.m. on Saturday morning, we wheeled the cart back into its spot, directly in front of my charger, and chained it down with a heavy-duty bike lock for dramatic effect. We placed laminated signs on either side, quoting the HOA bylaw on literacy and educational installations, complete with the subsection number and a QR code linking to the full text. By 7:15, the first neighbor stopped to take a picture. By 8 o'clock, a small crowd had gathered. By 9 o'clock, someone posted about it on the local community Facebook page with the caption, "Karen's cart got a brain." Karen, however, didn't make an appearance until almost noon. I was trimming my front hedges when I saw her appear at the end of the cul-de-sac, sunglasses on, mouth already half open in horror. She didn't speed up. She slowed down, like her brain couldn't compute what she was looking at. As she got closer, she began to visibly tremble. Her golf cart, her symbol of untouchable authority, was now a pastel blue public library on wheels, with toddlers pulling books from shelves and old ladies snapping selfies with the quote board. She stormed across the lawn toward me. "What did you do to my cart?" she hissed. "Improved it," I replied cheerfully. "It's now an educational installation." protected under your own HOA rules. Isn't that wonderful? You vandalized my property, she snapped, eyes twitching. I gestured toward the laminated signage. Technically, you abandoned it for weeks in a shared public space, in violation of Article 3D regarding idle community vehicles. I simply optimized its purpose. She turned toward the crowd, clearly realizing she couldn't cause a scene without making herself look even worse. A little girl walked up to her with a picture book and said, "Thank you, Miss Karen, this is my favorite story." Karen blinked like she'd been hit with a tranquilizer dart. She turned and stomped back to her house. But the damage, or rather the improvement, was done. That evening, I hosted a cart-warming party. I served lemonade, mini cupcakes, and let the neighborhood kids draw chalk art around the cart, which Mateo turned into a full-on mural. By sunset, the book cart had over 50 visitors, and someone brought a boom box playing classical music. The HOA's little iron-fisted empire had just been turned into a neighborhood festival. Karen didn't show up, but someone in our group noticed her peeking through the blinds. The next morning, I woke up to find a handwritten note slipped under my door. It was from Karen. It said, "This is not over." I laughed. Not because I wasn't worried. Karen was still president, still technically in control of the board, but because I had learned something crucial. She thrived on control, on secrecy, on rules twisted behind closed doors. But now the spotlight was on her. Everyone was watching. Every time she tried to flex her power now, it would be measured against the blue cart parked proudly in front of my house, filled with books, laughter, and laminated bylaws. She wanted a war. I was giving her a revolution. And the best part? I wasn't even finished yet. Karen waited exactly 48 hours before launching her counterattack, and when it came, it wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, bureaucratic, and dripping with that passive-aggressive flair only someone who color codes HOA violations in a binder could muster. It started with an official notice delivered to my door in a manila envelope, sealed with an HOA sticker that looked suspiciously like it had been printed at home. The letter inside accused me of multiple violations: public defacement, unauthorized modification of community property, and the nebulous but terrifying charge of creating a safety hazard through unsanctioned structures. The best part? It ended with a summons to an emergency board meeting scheduled at 10 a.m. the following day, an audience with Karen and whatever hand-picked stooges were left in her crumbling empire. I showed up to that meeting in a collared shirt, khakis, and a look of calm indifference. Clara came with me, carrying a thick folder labeled Exhibit A, Karen's Nonsense. We were met in the clubhouse by Karen, her loyal sidekick Dolores, and a third man I didn't recognize who introduced himself as the new interim compliance advisor. Translation: a friend of Karen's nephew who probably thought this was going to be his big break into politics. The meeting was held in the middle of the clubhouse's multipurpose room, decorated with last year's faded Halloween banners and a dusty coffee machine that hadn't worked since 2019. Karen began the proceedings with her usual pageantry, clearing her throat like a judge about to hand down a death sentence. She read off each of my alleged violations with a dramatic pause between each line, as if expecting gasps from the non-existent audience. I waited patiently, nodding, occasionally jotting fake notes just to annoy her. When she finally concluded with, "Failure to comply may result in suspension of neighborhood privileges, fines not exceeding $3,000, and, if necessary, civil referral," I calmly opened my own folder. First, I presented photographic evidence of the cart's location prior to transformation, multiple shots of it abandoned for days at a time in front of my charger. Then I read aloud the bylaw stating that abandoned or idle vehicles left in shared zones for more than 48 hours without use or movement could be reclassified as community nuisance fixtures. Karen shifted uncomfortably. Next, I handed out printed copies of the literacy exemption clause. Highlighted, underlined, footnoted, and with QR codes linking directly to the HOA's own digital handbook. But the real bombshell came when Clara spoke. She produced signed statements from 4 previously suspended board members confirming that Karen had unilaterally suspended them without due process. One of them, Milton, had even included screenshots from an old group chat where Karen openly joked about ruling by absence. Clara also provided a timeline showing how every member who disagreed with her mysteriously ended up inactive. She then turned to the interim compliance advisor and asked, in a clear voice, "On whose authority was your role created, and can you show us the meeting minutes approving it?" He blinked. Karen began to stammer. Dolores started whispering something about needing to use the restroom. Within 15 minutes, the meeting collapsed. Karen called for a temporary adjournment and stormed into the back office. The interim guy followed her, looking like he regretted every life decision that had led him to this fluorescent-lit disaster. The fallout was delicious. By sunset, Clara received an email from the HOA management company acknowledging the evidence and calling for a full reinstatement of the previously suspended board members. They also demanded a review of Karen's recent decisions, particularly those involving personal use of shared assets and misuse of authority. A special vote was scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, Karen lost control of the narrative, and that's when things got chaotic. Rather than go quietly, she began a whisper campaign, telling neighbors that I was a cyberstalker, that I had hacked HOA servers, and that I was planning to install surveillance drones over the pool. To her dismay, most residents didn't believe her. The Cart Library had become a beloved fixture overnight. Kids visited it every afternoon. Retirees brought folding chairs to sit and chat next to it. Someone even added a poetry jar, where residents could drop off their favorite verses. The HOA community Facebook page turned into a war zone. Karen posted long, caps-locked rants about EV fascists and radical literature propaganda. People responded with photos of themselves enjoying books next to the cart, using hashtags like BooksNotBeige and Read and Recharge. Someone created a meme of Karen's face photoshopped onto the Wicked Witch of the West, holding a library card like a fireball. When the special vote day arrived, the turnout was massive. Normally, HOA votes attracted about a dozen residents, most of whom only came for the free donut. This time, nearly half the community showed up. Clara gave a short speech about transparency and fairness. I stayed quiet, letting the story speak for itself. Karen tried to speak, but her voice was drowned out by polite clapping for Clara and a small but noticeable chorus of boos. The vote wasn't even close. Karen was removed from her position as HOA president by a margin so wide, even Dolores looked relieved. The board reinstated all its former members, and a motion was passed to declare the book cart an official community fixture, maintained by volunteers and protected under neighborhood improvement bylaws. Karen stormed out, slamming the clubhouse door behind her. But she wasn't done. The next morning, I received a notice from the local small claims court. Karen was suing me personally for public humiliation, theft of private property, emotional damages, and intentional community disruption. The court date was in 3 weeks. She had filed the claim independently, without HOA backing, using her own name. At first, I thought it was a joke. But no, she was serious. She was doubling down. I should have been nervous, maybe even worried. But all I felt was a strange, electrifying thrill. She was walking straight into a courtroom with a box of grievances, no actual proof, and a reputation that had just been publicly shredded. And I was bringing receipts, witnesses, bylaws, and an entire neighborhood's worth of goodwill. Karen had just chosen the hill she wanted to die on. And it was made of books. The courtroom smelled faintly like old paper and desperation, a combination that oddly suited the occasion. I sat at the defendant's table, my documents neatly organized, a thick binder of printed evidence resting next to me like a steel shield. Karen sat across the aisle, flanked by 2 manila folders and a pink purse that looked more like a fashion statement than a legal aid. She wore a beige power suit and a glare so sharp it could slice drywall. Her expression told the entire room one thing: She was here to win, even if she had no idea how. The judge, a woman with a calm but no-nonsense demeanor, glanced over the case file with a mixture of fatigue and curiosity. This wasn't the sort of trial that made headlines or shook cities, but it had that special kind of drama reserved for HOA vendettas and suburban politics. The judge looked up over her glasses and addressed Karen first. "Ms. Thompson, please summarize the basis of your complaint." Karen stood like she was auditioning for courtroom television. She began a speech laced with emotional flourishes, describing how I had defiled her personal vehicle, humiliated her in front of the entire neighborhood, and destroyed her peace and standing within the community. She described the book cart transformation as an act of theft and defacement, comparing it to modern vandalism disguised as community service. She even began tearing up when she spoke of the psychological trauma of seeing her cart turned into a public library. The judge listened with an expression of practiced neutrality, jotting down occasional notes. When Karen finally concluded her monologue with a dramatic sigh, the judge turned to me. "Mr. Flores, your response?" I stood, flipped open my binder, and kept it simple. I explained the events as they had happened, calmly and without embellishment. I submitted photo evidence showing the cart parked for weeks on end in front of my Charger. I shared HOA bylaws outlining the regulations on idle vehicles, the protections granted to educational installations, and the documentation proving the cart had not been registered as personal property. I provided screenshots of Karen's own emails stating the cart was shared community equipment when she was justifying its location. And finally, I handed over a petition signed by over 50 residents who supported the book cart and included testimonials calling it the best thing this HOA has ever seen. Karen attempted to interrupt several times, each time receiving a raised eyebrow from the judge and a gentle reminder to remain silent while the defense spoke. Her hands twisted nervously around the handle of her purse, and her face turned a shade redder with every document I submitted. The judge called for a short recess before delivering her decision. As I stood near the hallway water fountain, Clara approached and handed me a granola bar. "You've got this," she said with a grin. "She's unraveling faster than a discount sweater." When court reconvened, the judge didn't waste time. She addressed the courtroom with clarity and finality. "This case is dismissed. The plaintiff failed to establish any legal claim for personal property damage or defamation. The cart was not registered as a private asset, and the defendant's actions were protected under both HOA regulations and the broader community enhancement ordinances. Furthermore, the court finds the plaintiff's emotional distress claims unsubstantiated and largely self-inflicted. Case closed. Karen sat frozen in her seat for a moment before slowly packing up her folders. She didn't speak. She didn't look at me. She just walked out, shoulders hunched, a shadow of the tyrant who had once ruled over golf carts and garbage can citations like a suburban monarch. The moment I stepped outside, I was greeted by Clara, George, Mateo, and half a dozen others from our little resistance crew. There were no champagne bottles or ticker tape parades, but the smiles and fist bumps were more than enough. News traveled fast. By the time I got home, someone had chalked, "We Red Heart Book Cart" on the sidewalk. Tasha had updated the side panel of the cart to include a tiny badge, "Certified Court-Approved Public Installation." The neighborhood began to change, subtly at first, then in big ways. The newly reformed HOA board established a community feedback system, actual open meetings, and a rotating committee that included voices from every block. The book cart became a staple. Kids stopped by daily, neighbors donated titles, and even Dolores started volunteering to clean it once a week. Clara was elected the new HOA president. Her first act was to formalize protections for resident-installed sustainable infrastructure, including EV chargers. As for Karen, she sold her house 3 weeks after the court case. No official statement, no farewell party. A moving van arrived one morning and was gone by noon. Rumor had it she moved 2 towns over to a new development, one without an HOA. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Life slowly returned to normal, though it was better than before. My charger was finally free, and so was the neighborhood, from pettiness, from arbitrary fines, from the fear of crossing an unspoken line. The book cart stood as a reminder that standing up doesn't always require shouting. Sometimes it just takes a little creativity, a few books, and the willingness to turn someone's blockade into a gift for everyone. A few months later, I was walking past the cart when I noticed a kid sitting on the curb, reading a dog-eared copy of a fantasy novel. He looked up and asked, "Hey, are you the guy who made this?" I smiled. "Sort of. A lot of people helped." He nodded thoughtfully, then said, "Karen said it was evil, but my mom said it saved the neighborhood." I chuckled and sat beside him. "Your mom's got good instincts." He went back to his book, and I sat there a while, watching the late sun bounce off the solar panels, listening to the gentle creak of the cart's open shelves in the breeze. A cart that once blocked power was now distributing knowledge. A monument of control turned into a symbol of community. And to think, it all started because someone parked in front of my charger. Sometimes revenge doesn't come with explosions or lawsuit. Sometimes it's a bookshelf with wheels and a brass plate that reminds everyone of what can happen when one person pushes too far. And sometimes the best way to win is to let the whole neighborhood read about it.